My name is Eleanor Harrington, and after 52 years of marriage, my husband Richard divorced me and married my best friend Diane on the same day. I didn't say a word because I knew that somehow, someday, she would become his karma. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, like and share this video, and turn on notifications to get our new daily stories delivered straight to your feed. I stood motionless in our empty house, the house that no longer felt like home. The divorce papers had arrived by courier while I was grocery shopping for our anniversary dinner. His signature was already dry on the line. The call from Diane, my closest friend for 30 years, came just minutes later. Ellie, I don't know how to say this. Her voice trembled with poorly concealed excitement rather than remorse. Richard and we've fallen in love. We got married this morning at the courthouse. I said nothing. Not a single word. I simply placed the phone down gently and sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by bags of groceries meant to celebrate over 5 decades of what I believed was devotion. The salmon I'd carefully selected, Richard's favorite, was beginning to warm. The bottle of champagne, the same brand we'd had at our wedding, sweated in its paper bag. I methodically put everything away, my movements mechanical, my mind curiously blank. That had been 3 months ago. Today, as I sorted through photo albums deciding what to keep and what to discard before the house sold, I finally allowed myself to feel. Not the crushing pain I'd expected, but something quieter and infinitely more dangerous. Determination. She's his karma now, I whispered to the empty room filled with ghosts of our shared past. I traced my finger over a photo of Diane at our 25th anniversary party, her arms slung possessively around Richard even then. The signs had always been there. I'd met Diane when I was 40, when we both volunteered at the local library. We'd bonded over classic literature and fine cooking. Diane had never married, preferring, as she put it, the freedom to experience life's buffet rather than settle for a single dish. How many times had she joked about my good fortune in landing a successful man like Richard? How many times had she commented on our beautiful home, our investments, the security I enjoyed? Richard had been furious when my lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman recommended by my niece, had outmaneuvered him in the settlement. I would receive half the proceeds from the house, a substantial portion of his retirement funds, and alimony that reflected my contributions to his success over 5 decades. You don't need all that money, he'd snarled during our last conversation. You never worked a day in your life. I had simply stared at him, this stranger wearing my husband's face. Never worked? Who had managed our household while raising our children? Who had hosted countless dinner parties that helped secure his business deals? Who had put her own dreams aside to support his? I did work, Richard. I'd finally said, my voice soft but steel-edged. I worked for us. The difference is, I never asked for credit. I hadn't told him about my plans. There was no point. Richard had already written me off as the aging wife, the discarded half of our partnership. At 68, I was supposed to fade gracefully into obscurity, perhaps moving to a retirement community to play bridge and complain about my ungrateful ex-husband. That was not my plan. In the attic, I found what I'd been looking for: notebooks filled with recipes I'd created over decades. My culinary education had been informal but comprehensive. Weekend courses whenever Richard traveled for business, cooking shows I recorded and studied, techniques practiced and perfected in my kitchen. My dinner parties had been legendary in Richard's corporate circle, my food often receiving more compliments than I did. Diane had always been particularly effusive in her praise. Ellie, you should have been a chef. You're wasting your talent feeding just one man. The irony of those words wasn't lost on me now. My daughter Caroline called from Seattle that evening. Mom, I spoke to Dad yesterday. Did you know they're honeymooning in Bali? In the exact resort where you and Dad went for your 50th? I didn't, I replied calmly. But it doesn't matter, darling. Doesn't matter? Mom, They're flaunting their relationship. Diane posted pictures all over Facebook. She's wearing your pearl earrings, the ones Dad gave you for your anniversary last year. I closed my eyes briefly. Caroline listened to me. Your father and Diane can do whatever they want. I'm focusing on my own life now. But I mean it, honey. I'm not interested in their drama. I've got plans of my own. There was a pause before Caroline spoke again, curiosity replacing outrage. What kind of plans? I smiled, running my hand over the top notebook in the box. Do you remember how I always talked about having my own restaurant someday? Before I met your father? Vaguely, you mentioned it when we watched those cooking competitions together. Well, I've decided it's time. I woke before dawn on moving day, my body remembering decades of early rising despite having nowhere to be. The movers would arrive at 8. Most of my possessions were already packed, labeled, and ready for transportation to the small apartment I'd rented downtown, a temporary solution while my real plans developed. In the kitchen, I brewed a final pot of coffee in the machine Richard and I had purchased in Italy a decade earlier. I carried my mug to the garden, settling on the stone bench amid my carefully tended roses. The sun was just beginning to color the horizon, promising another beautiful summer day. The garden had been mine entirely. Richard had no interest in plants beyond appreciating their aesthetic value. Here, I had processed joys and sorrows, planned menus, daydreamed about paths not taken. Here, I had first allowed myself to cry after receiving the divorce papers, the roses the only witnesses to my pain. Time to say goodbye, I whispered, taking cuttings from my favorite specimens. They would travel with me, ready to root in new soil, much like me. That night in my small downtown apartment, I couldn't sleep. The city sounds were different from my quiet suburban neighborhood, and the mattress, though new, felt wrong somehow. I rose at 3 a.m. and moved to the small balcony overlooking the street. For the first time since the divorce, a wave of desolation washed over me. What was I doing? At 68, was I really planning to start a new career? Open a restaurant? Compete with chefs half my age, many with formal training I lacked? I returned inside and opened the box containing my recipe notebooks. I selected one at random, a collection from the late 80s when I'd experimented with fusion cuisine before it became trendy. The pages were filled with my neat handwriting, margin notes documenting successes and failures, adjustments and improvements. I traced a recipe for ginger lemongrass roasted chicken with my fingertip. I remembered the dinner party where I'd first served it. Richard's potential Japanese investors had been impressed, the contract signed by evening's end. Richard had kissed my cheek afterward. "You're my secret weapon, Ellie," he'd said. I reached for my phone and called an old acquaintance in France, Jean-Pierre Mercier, a chef I'd kept in sporadic contact with over the years. "I'm at a crossroads," I admitted, "and I need some professional advice." Over the next hour, I outlined my situation and my plans. When I finished, there was silence for several moments. "You know," Jean-Pierre finally said, "many chefs find their true voice later in life. Experience brings depth that youth cannot match. But nothing. I think it's brilliant, Eleanor. Your cooking always had something special, an instinct for balance and harmony that cannot be taught." I felt tears prick my eyes. "Thank you, Jean-Pierre." "Don't thank me yet. I'm sending my sous chef, Antoine, to help you set up. He's looking for a change, and this project intrigues me. Consider it my investment in your future." 2 days later, I stood in an empty storefront on Maple Street, in what real estate agents were calling the city's emerging culinary district. The space had previously housed a moderately successful bistro that closed when its owner retired. "The kitchen equipment is included in the lease," Jacob explained, leading me through swinging doors into a professional kitchen that made my heart race with excitement. "Most of it is fairly new. The owner updated about 2 years ago." I ran my hand along stainless steel countertops, inspected the 8-burner range, peered into the walk-in refrigerator. It was smaller than some restaurant kitchens, but perfect for what I envisioned: an intimate dining establishment focused on quality rather than quantity. By the time we parted, I had secured a 3-year lease with option to renew, at terms slightly more favorable than I'd anticipated. Over the next 2 months, I threw myself into restaurant development. The space underwent a careful renovation, not a complete overhaul, but thoughtful updates to create the atmosphere I envisioned. Soft greens and blues replaced the previous owner's dark reds. Custom light fixtures installed by a local artisan provided warm illumination that flattered both the food and the diners. Antoine arrived from France and proved invaluable in kitchen organization and staff training. Together, we developed a menu that showcased my signature dishes while incorporating seasonal variations. "This sauce," Antoine said one evening during recipe testing, closing his eyes as he tasted my wild mushroom reduction. "This is what will set us apart. It tastes like memories of autumn walks in the forest." I laughed. That's exactly what I was trying to capture. We named the restaurant Eleanor's. Simple, direct, personal. The logo, an elegant script against a background suggesting fresh herbs, appeared on everything from menus to the awning above the entrance. The night before the official opening, I hosted an invitation-only event for family, friends, and select local influencers. The restaurant hummed with conversation and laughter as guests sampled menu items and signature cocktails. I moved through the space, checking details, greeting guests, and quietly guiding my staff. I wore a chef's coat embroidered with the restaurant's logo, a gift from Antoine and the kitchen team. Caroline arrived with her husband and immediately sought me out. "Mom, this is incredible." She gestured around the elegant space. "I can't believe you put this together so quickly." "I've had these ideas simmering for decades," I replied, accepting her embrace. It was just a matter of finally turning up the heat. Later, as coffee and dessert were being served, I slipped away to the kitchen for a moment of quiet reflection. The evening had gone perfectly, food executed flawlessly, service smooth, guests impressed. Tomorrow would bring the first real test: paying customers with no emotional connection to the chef. As I leaned against the counter, mentally reviewing the night, my phone chimed with a text message. It was from an unknown number, but the content made the sender immediately clear. "Heard about your little restaurant. Quaint way to keep busy in your golden years. Might stop by sometime." I deleted the message without responding. Diane's attempt to diminish my achievement fell flat. This wasn't a hobby or a distraction. It was my redemption and rebirth. And from what Caroline had mentioned earlier about Richard and Diane's increasingly public arguments, it seemed karma was already beginning its work. 6 months after opening, Eleanor's had become the most difficult reservation to secure in town. The initial positive reviews had snowballed into national attention when a prominent food critic happened to dine with us while visiting family. His glowing write-up in a major publication had triggered a flood of interest that showed no signs of abating. I stood at the pass during a busy Saturday service, meticulously checking each plate before it left the kitchen. My standards remained exacting, a trait that had initially caused tension with some staff, but now inspired fierce loyalty and pride. After service, as the kitchen staff cleaned and prepped for the next day, I reviewed reservations with Sophia, my dining room manager. "We're completely booked through next month," Sophia reported, scrolling through the digital system. "And there's a waiting list for cancellations." I nodded, pleased but not surprised. "Any names I should know about tomorrow night?" "Actually, yes." Sophia hesitated. "There's a reservation for 2 under the name Harrington. I assumed it might be your son or daughter, but the first name is Richard." I kept my expression neutral, though my stomach tightened. "I see. And his guest?" Sophia checked the notes. "A Ms. Diane Winters." "Of course." The text message from months ago had promised they might stop by sometime. I had almost forgotten about it, too absorbed in the restaurant's success to dwell on Diane's passive-aggressive communication. Put them at table 12, I decided after a moment's consideration. Sophia looked surprised. Not one of the premier tables by the window?
No.
12 is perfect. It was a perfectly acceptable table, not the worst in the house, but certainly not the best. It was also positioned to give me a clear view from the kitchen pass, while remaining partly concealed from other diners. After Sophia left, I lingered in the empty restaurant, sipping a glass of Bordeaux. Richard and Diane's impending visit didn't trouble me as much as I might have expected. 6 months ago, the prospect would have sent me into an emotional tailspin. Now, it was merely an interesting development in a life that had taken a satisfying new direction. My phone rang, Caroline calling. "Mom, have you seen the news about Dad?" Her voice was tense. I set down my wine glass. "No, what's happened?" "His company is under investigation. Something about financial irregularities in their Asian division. It's all over the business news." I moved to my small office off the kitchen and opened my laptop. Sure enough, the story was featured prominently on several financial news sites. Harrington International faces federal probe. Richard's company, the one he'd built over 4 decades with me by his side, was being investigated for potential securities fraud and tax evasion related to international operations. "This is serious, Mom," Caroline continued. "Dad could face criminal charges if they find evidence he knew about it." "I'm sure his lawyers will handle it," I replied, skimming the articles. One mentioned that company stock had plummeted 30% on the news. The next evening, I was expediting service when Sophia appeared at the kitchen door. "They're here," she said quietly. I nodded without looking up from the plate I was garnishing. Table 12 as planned. Throughout the busy service, I maintained my focus on the food and my team. Occasionally, I glanced through the pass to observe Richard and Diane. They were dressed formally. Richard in a dark suit that I recognized as one of his favorites, Diane in a designer dress that seemed too youthful for her. They appeared to be having an intense discussion, heads bent close together over the table. When their appetizers were ready, my acclaimed scallops with citrus beurre blanc, I inspected them with particular care before releasing them for service. Not because these customers deserved special treatment, but because every dish from my kitchen represented my standards. As service wound down, I noticed Richard and Diane preparing to leave. They had ordered dessert and coffee, completing the full dining experience. I made a subtle gesture to Antoine to take over the pass, then moved to a position where I could observe without being immediately visible. Richard settled the bill, substantial, given the bottle of premium champagne they'd ordered, and they rose to depart. As they passed near the kitchen, I stepped into view. The moment when Richard spotted me was unmistakable. He froze mid-step, his expression shifting from relaxed to stunned. Diane, following his gaze, reacted with similar shock, though she recovered more quickly. "Eleanor," Richard said, his voice oddly formal, "you've created quite an impressive establishment." "Thank you, Richard." My smile was professional, the same I offered all satisfied customers. "I hope you enjoyed your meal." Diane stepped forward, her smile tight. "It was lovely, Ellie, though the lamb was slightly overdone for my taste." I nodded, unperturbed by the petty criticism. Everyone's preferences are different. Perhaps medium rare would suit you better next time. "Next time," Diane repeated, her laugh brittle. "Yes, perhaps." An awkward silence descended until Richard cleared his throat. "Your success appears well-deserved." The critics weren't exaggerating. "Thank you." I maintained my composure, neither warm nor cold. I should return to the kitchen. We still have several tables to serve. As I turned to leave, Richard spoke again. "Eleanor, I'd like to talk sometime." "About everything." I paused, considering. I'm quite busy these days, Richard. The restaurant requires my full attention. 2 months later, I received surprising news through the grapevine. Diane was having an affair with Curtis Reynolds, Richard's former business partner. Younger, quite wealthy, and notably unmarried despite being considered one of the city's most eligible bachelors. Apparently, Richard had confronted them at the country club, creating quite a scene. Meanwhile, the investigation into his company had intensified, with Richard named personally in shareholder lawsuits. The board had voted unanimously to remove him as chairman and suspended his pension pending the investigation's outcome. On a crisp autumn evening, as I was checking inventory in the wine cellar, Sophia appeared at the door. "Chef, there's someone asking to see you. She says it's important." "Who is it?" "Diane Winters. She seems upset." I straightened, setting aside my tablet. "Show her to my office, please." When I entered my small office, Diane was standing by the window, arms wrapped around herself despite the warm evening. She turned at the sound of the door, and I was struck by how different she looked from our encounter at the restaurant. The carefully maintained appearance had slipped. Her makeup was minimal, her hair unstyled, her clothing simple and dark. "Ellie, thank you for seeing me," she began, her voice lacking its usual confident edge. "What can I do for you, Diane?" I remained standing, maintaining both physical and emotional distance. Diane swallowed visibly. "I suppose you've heard about the situation with Curtis." "I've heard rumors. They're true." Diane sank into a chair without waiting for an invitation. "I've made a terrible mess of everything." I sat at my desk, facing my former friend. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're the only person who might understand," Diane whispered. "The only one who really knows Richard." "I thought I knew him," I corrected, "until he filed for divorce and married you on the same day." Diane flinched. "I deserve that. I deserve all of it." She looked up, eyes glistening with unshed tears. "What I did to you was unforgivable. I see that now." "What exactly do you want from me, Diane? Absolution? Advice?" "Neither." "Both." "I don't know." Diane wiped at her eyes. "Curtis has ended things. He said he never intended anything serious. It was just an amusing diversion while I was bored with Richard." I felt a flicker of the old pain, remembering how I had once considered this woman my closest friend. "And Richard? What does he say about all this?" "He's filing for divorce." Diane's voice cracked. "He says he can forgive many things, but not betrayal and public humiliation." The irony was so profound that I almost laughed. Instead, I regarded Diane with clinical detachment. "So you've lost both the husband you betrayed me for and the lover you betrayed him for. And now you've come to me because I have nowhere else to go," Diane admitted. "My sister in Chicago doesn't want me staying with her. She always disapproved of how things happened with Richard. My friends, our old friends, have all taken Richard's side. And what do you expect me to do about that?" Diane's desperation was palpable. "I don't know. Maybe you could give me a job here? Just temporarily until I figure things out. I'm a good hostess. I know wine. I could help with front-of-house operations." I stared at her in disbelief. "You want to work for me? After everything?" "Please, Ellie. I'm not asking for friendship. Just mercy." For a moment, I was tempted, not by compassion, but by the poetic justice of having Diane employed in a subservient position in my successful establishment. The woman who had taken everything from me would depend on me for survival. The thought passed quickly. I had worked too hard to build something positive from the ashes of my marriage to taint it with petty vengeance.
No, Diane.
"I won't give you a job." My voice was firm but not cruel. Not because I'm unwilling to forgive, but because this restaurant is my fresh start. Having you here would be a constant reminder of the past for both of us. 1 week later, a more shocking visitor appeared. As I was reviewing applications for a pastry chef position, Antoine knocked on my office door. Chef, there's someone asking about kitchen work. Not through the usual channels. I looked up, frowning slightly. We have a hiring process. They should submit an application online first. I know, but 6 months after Richard's modest promotion to management of the dishwashing team across our now 2 locations, my culinary empire continued to flourish. The cookbook deal was in the works, and I had made appearances on several regional cooking shows. Richard had grown into his role with unexpected satisfaction. He had assembled a small but efficient team, implementing systems that improved workflow and reduced breakage. It was nothing like running a multi-million-dollar corporation, yet he found genuine fulfillment in the tangible results of his work each day. His living situation had improved as well. With his slightly increased salary and consistent employment history, he had qualified for a small apartment of his own. Nothing luxurious, but private and dignified. On a brisk autumn evening, I called Richard into my office. I've been approached about a television opportunity, I began. A 6-episode special for the Culinary Channel, featuring the restaurant and our approach to seasonal cooking. That's wonderful, Richard said sincerely. Congratulations. Thank you. It will mean some adjustments to our operations during filming. They'll be here intermittently for about 12 weeks. Richard didn't hesitate. We'll make it work. Just give me the filming schedule as soon as it's available, and I'll reorganize the rotations. I nodded, pleased with his response. There's one more thing. They're interested in the personal story behind the restaurant. My journey from homemaker to chef-owner. Richard immediately understood the implication. They'll want to talk about our history.
Yes.
I've been clear that I won't discuss personal details on camera, but the basic narrative, 52 years of marriage, then building this business after divorce. That's part of what interests them. I understand, Richard said quietly. It won't be a problem. I'm not ashamed of my role in your story. The television series aired the following spring to excellent ratings and critical acclaim. My story, my reinvention after decades as a corporate wife and homemaker, resonated with viewers, particularly women who had deferred their own dreams for family obligations. The exposure brought new opportunities, speaking engagements, endorsement offers, discussions about a more permanent television presence. Through it all, I maintained my focus on the restaurants, insisting that my primary identity remained chef-owner rather than media personality. One afternoon, as I was testing new recipes for our 3rd location in Chicago, Richard approached with a folder in hand. An application for the Chicago location, he explained. I thought you should see it personally rather than through normal channels. I glanced at the name, my expression revealing nothing. Diane.
Yes.
She came by earlier today. I scanned the resume, then set it aside. Her qualifications were adequate for an entry-level position. She had completed a restaurant management program and gained experience through internships, a sincere effort at rebuilding her life. What do you think I should do, Richard? The question surprised even me as it left my lips. Richard considered this thoughtfully. I think you should do whatever feels right for your business and your peace of mind. I nodded, picking up the resume again. And if you were in my position, I think I would remember that second chances have value. That people can change when circumstances force them to reconsider their choices. He paused. But I also think I would establish very clear boundaries from the beginning. 2 weeks later, I made my decision, offering Diane a 3-month probationary position in Chicago. Front of house, entry level, reporting directly to the general manager there, not to Richard or me. No special treatment, positive or negative. And at the first sign of drama or manipulation, she would be out. It's not about forgiveness, Richard, I explained when he expressed surprise at my decision. It's about not allowing past injuries to dictate present decisions. We all make choices every day about who we want to be. This is the person I choose to be, someone who evaluates on merit rather than history. The Chicago restaurant opened to considerable fanfare. Richard attended the opening night, supervising operations and troubleshooting minor issues as they arose. Diane, dressed in the simple but elegant uniform of the front-of-house staff, performed her duties with focused professionalism. If she felt any awkwardness about working for her former friend's establishment, it didn't show in her efficient service and genuine interactions with customers. I moved through the space with gracious authority, personally greeting special guests and checking in with kitchen staff. I acknowledged Diane with the same cordial professionalism I showed all employees, neither overly familiar nor notably distant. Near the end of the evening, as service was winding down, I approached Richard as he supervised final cleanup. Everything ran remarkably smoothly, I noted. Your systems worked well. Thank you, Richard replied, pleased by my recognition. The staff is well trained. They'll be fine without much supervision going forward. I nodded, then hesitated before speaking again. I've been thinking about next steps. Richard looked at me inquiringly. For the business? Partly. I glanced around the successful new location. The cookbook is coming out next month. There's talk of a regular television segment. The restaurants are all performing well. You've accomplished an extraordinary amount in a very short time, Richard acknowledged. What are you considering next? Balance, I said simply. I've proven what I needed to prove, to myself most of all. Now I want to enjoy this success without being consumed by it. Richard understood immediately. In our previous life together, he had been the one consumed by professional ambition, always chasing the next achievement, the next expansion, the next validation. I was determined not to repeat that pattern. Wise, he said sincerely. Success means little if you don't take time to appreciate it. I smiled slightly, recognizing the hard-won wisdom in his observation. Exactly. As we stood together overlooking the restaurant that represented my vision brought to life, I felt a moment of perfect clarity, a recognition of how completely our fortunes had reversed, yet how that reversal had ultimately benefited us both. I had found my true calling and the confidence to pursue it. Richard had discovered humility and the satisfaction of honest work. Even Diane, across the room efficiently closing out her section, appeared to have found a more authentic path forward. The wheel had indeed turned, bringing us all full circle to exactly where we needed to be. 1 year after the Chicago opening, my culinary enterprise had achieved a stable and profitable equilibrium. The cookbook had become a bestseller, my television appearances had settled into a manageable monthly schedule, and all 3 restaurant locations maintained their reputation for excellence. I called a meeting of my senior staff, Richard, Antoine, Sophia, and the managers from each location connected via video conference. We gathered in the private dining room of the original restaurant, where I had set out coffee and pastries from our kitchen. Thank you all for making time for this meeting. I began once everyone had settled. I have several announcements to make about the future of our company. I had made an important decision, one that felt right after much reflection. First, I've decided to formalize our business structure. We're incorporating as Eleanor's Hospitality Group, with proper corporate governance and clearly defined roles. I turned to Antoine first. Antoine will become executive chef across all locations, with authority to maintain our culinary standards and train kitchen leadership. Antoine looked simultaneously honored and concerned. Chef, this sounds as if you are stepping back. I smiled reassuringly. Not stepping back, so much as stepping into a different role. I'll continue as CEO and creative director, focusing on menu development, media opportunities, and strategic growth. I turned to Sophia next. I'm promoting you to Director of Service Operations, overseeing front-of-house standards across all locations. Finally, I turned to Richard. Richard, I'd like you to take on the role of Chief Operating Officer. You'd oversee all day-to-day operations, from staffing to supplies to systems implementation. Richard was stunned by the offer. This wasn't merely another incremental promotion. This was a key executive position, a vote of confidence in his abilities that far exceeded his expectations.
I
don't know what to say, he managed finally. Thank you for your trust. You've earned it, I said simply. Your experience in corporate management has proven invaluable as we've grown, and your understanding of our particular culture ensures you'll maintain our standards appropriately. After the meeting, when Richard and I were alone, I clarified my position. I want to be clear about something, Richard. This promotion isn't about our past. It's about your performance and the company's needs. I understand, Richard assured me, and I appreciate your making that distinction explicit. I nodded, then continued more tentatively. There's something else I need to discuss with you. Something personal. Richard waited, curious about this unusual departure from our typically professional interactions. I've met someone, I said finally. His name is James. He's a literature professor at the university. We've been seeing each other for a few months now. The news caught Richard by surprise, though in retrospect, it shouldn't have. I was an attractive, accomplished woman. Of course there would be interested men in my life. I'm happy for you, he said, finding that he mostly meant it. He's a fortunate man. I studied him carefully, gauging the sincerity of his response. Thank you. I wanted to tell you directly before you heard it elsewhere. Given our unique situation. Richard appreciated my consideration. I understand. Will we be meeting him soon? Perhaps. We're taking things slowly. Neither of us is interested in rushing into anything complicated. My expression softened. At our age, we've both learned the value of patience and careful consideration. Over the following months, Richard threw himself into his new role, working closely with me to formalize processes and create scalable systems for potential future growth. Our professional relationship evolved into a productive partnership built on mutual respect and complementary skills. Occasionally, he would glimpse me with James at community events or leaving the restaurant after dinner, a distinguished man with silver hair and kind eyes who looked at me with unmistakable admiration. We seemed well-matched in intellect and temperament, our conversations animated and our laughter easy. The 5th anniversary of my original restaurant arrived with fanfare befitting a culinary institution. Local media covered the milestone, food critics revisited their initial reviews with renewed appreciation, and loyal customers shared memories of memorable meals on social media. My empire had expanded thoughtfully over the years. 5 restaurants now operated under my company umbrella, each maintaining the standards of excellence I'd established from the beginning. My television appearances had evolved into a popular streaming series, and a second cookbook was nearing publication. On the evening of the anniversary celebration, I closed the original restaurant to regular service for a special invitation-only event. The guest list included family, friends, early supporters, notable critics, and staff members past and present. I had transformed the space for the occasion, with elegant floral arrangements, commemorative menus featuring favorite dishes from the past 5 years, and a photo display chronicling the restaurant's evolution. Richard arrived early, overseeing last-minute preparations and ensuring the evening would proceed smoothly. He moved through the restaurant with quiet efficiency, the staff responding to his directions with respect earned through years of fair leadership. Everything looks perfect, I commented as I joined him near the bar, where specialty cocktails were being prepared for arriving guests. I wore a chef's coat embroidered with the restaurant's logo in gold thread, a gift from my senior staff for the occasion. The team has outdone themselves, Richard agreed. Tonight should be memorable. I nodded, my expression reflecting the significance of the milestone. I never imagined this, you know. When I opened that first day, I was just hoping to survive the year. And now you're an empire, Richard said with genuine admiration. I smiled. A small, carefully tended empire. Quality over quantity. Guests began arriving shortly after, the restaurant filling with conversation and laughter. Michael and Caroline were among the first to appear, both traveling from their respective cities with spouses and children in tow. They greeted me with obvious pride, then acknowledged Richard with a comfortable familiarity that had developed over years of family gatherings where his role had gradually shifted from awkward ex-husband to respected colleague in my business. Antoine directed the kitchen with his usual precision, overseeing the execution of the anniversary menu, a journey through my most acclaimed dishes from each year of operation. Sophia managed the dining room with equal skill, ensuring seamless service despite the unusual nature of the event. James, now my husband of 2 years, circulated among guests with charm and genuine interest, his academic background providing natural conversation skills. Our relationship had progressed with the measured pace of mature adults who valued companionship and intellectual connection above romance, though those who saw us together never doubted the depth of our affection. Midway through the evening, as guests were enjoying the third course, the door opened to admit a latecomer, Diane, who had flown in from Chicago where she now managed my newest location. She had come directly from the airport, her travel bag discreetly stored in the office before she joined the celebration. I observed her entrance with interest. Diane had transformed completely from the status-conscious social climber she had once been. Now in her early 70s, she carried herself with quiet dignity, her silver hair elegantly styled, her clothing tasteful but not ostentatious. She moved through the room greeting colleagues with genuine warmth, her position within the company earned through consistent performance rather than personal connection. When she approached me, there was a moment of perceptible hesitation before I extended my hand in professional welcome. We would never be friends again. Too much history lay between us for that. But we had achieved a working relationship built on mutual respect and shared commitment to the business. "Congratulations, Eleanor," Diane said, her tone sincere. "What you've built is truly remarkable." "Thank you," I replied simply. "I appreciate your making the trip for the occasion." After the main course, I stepped to the center of the restaurant, tapping a glass gently for attention. The room quieted as guests turned expectantly toward me. "Thank you all for sharing this special evening," I began, my voice clear and confident. 5 years ago, I opened these doors with trembling hands and racing heart, uncertain if anyone would come, much less return. Appreciative laughter rippled through the crowd. The journey from that first night to today has been extraordinary, filled with challenges, triumphs, and invaluable lessons. I glanced around the room, acknowledging key figures with warm smiles. None of this would have been possible without the talented team who believed in my vision and helped bring it to life. I proceeded to recognize staff members by name, highlighting individual contributions with specific examples that demonstrated my attention to detail and genuine appreciation for their efforts. I must also acknowledge the contribution of our Chief Operating Officer, I continued, turning toward Richard. His systems and processes have enabled our growth while maintaining the quality and consistency our guests expect. Richard nodded in acknowledgement, touched by my public recognition. "And finally," I said, my expression softening, "I want to thank my family, my children who supported my midlife career change even when it seemed slightly mad, and my husband James, who entered my life when I least expected new beginnings but needed them most." Later, as the celebration continued with dessert and commemorative gifts for guests, I stepped outside for a moment of quiet reflection. The night was clear, stars visible despite the city lights, the autumn air carrying a hint of the winter to come. Richard joined me moments later. "Escaping your own party?" he asked with a small smile. "Just catching my breath," I replied, gazing up at the sky. "Moments like these make me reflective." "Understandable. You've achieved something extraordinary." I was quiet for a moment before speaking again. Do you ever think about how different things might have been? If you hadn't left, if I hadn't opened a restaurant? The question surprised Richard. We rarely discussed our shared past so directly. Sometimes, he admitted, though not with regret, exactly. More with a sense of wonder at how completely our lives changed course. I nodded thoughtfully. I wonder sometimes if I would ever have discovered this path, if our marriage had continued. If I would have found the courage to pursue my own ambitions rather than supporting yours. Probably not, Richard acknowledged honestly. I wasn't exactly encouraging of independent ventures that might have diverted your attention from my needs. He paused, considering his next words carefully. As painful as it was at the time, the divorce may have been the best thing that happened to you. To both of us, I suggested, surprising him. You're a better man now than you were then, Richard. More authentic, more humble, more aware of others. The observation was delivered without judgment, a simple statement of perceived truth rather than criticism or praise. Perhaps we all ended up exactly where we needed to be, I reflected, though the path was more painful than it needed to be. We stood in companionable silence for a moment, our shared history a complex tapestry of joy and pain, betrayal and redemption. We should rejoin the guests, I said finally, turning toward the door. There's still the anniversary cake to present. The following morning, as staff cleared the last evidence of the celebration, I called Richard into my office. I appeared tired but content, the anniversary event having been both emotionally and physically demanding. I wanted to discuss something with you, I said, gesturing for him to sit. A potential new direction for the company. Richard settled into the chair opposite my desk, curious. What are you thinking? A culinary school, I explained, my eyes brightening with enthusiasm. Small, selective, focused on second careers and non-traditional students. People like me, who come to cooking later in life, but bring valuable experience from other fields. The idea was quintessentially me, thoughtful, purposeful, building on my personal journey to create opportunity for others. That's brilliant, Richard said sincerely. And perfectly aligned with your story, which has already inspired so many. I nodded, warming to the concept as I outlined my vision. We'd limit enrollment to ensure quality instruction. Use our restaurants as training grounds for practical experience. Focus on sustainable practices and business fundamentals alongside culinary techniques. Location? Richard asked, already considering logistics. The building next to the Chicago restaurant is available, I replied. It would need significant renovation, but the bones are good. And Chicago's central location makes it accessible from anywhere in the country. We spent the next hour discussing preliminary details, budget considerations, staffing requirements, potential curriculum. Richard found himself genuinely excited by the project, which represented a natural evolution of my impact on the culinary world. This could be your legacy, he observed as our discussion concluded. Beyond the restaurants and cookbooks, a way to multiply your influence by empowering others. I smiled, pleased by his understanding.
Exactly.
At our age, legacy becomes more important than expansion for its own sake. As Richard stood to leave, I stopped him with a final question. Would you consider relocating to Chicago to oversee the development? It would mean stepping back from day-to-day operations here, but I trust your judgment with this project more than anyone's. The offer represented both professional recognition and personal trust. Richard was deeply moved by the implicit forgiveness it suggested, not just tolerance of his presence or acknowledgement of his skills, but genuine confidence in his character. I would be honored, he said simply. 3 months later, Richard relocated to Chicago to begin work on the Eleanor Harrington Culinary Institute. He rented a comfortable apartment near the project site, established an office in the temporary construction trailer, and immersed himself in the challenging but rewarding process of bringing my vision to life. The work engaged him completely, consulting with architects about classroom design, interviewing potential instructors, developing administrative systems that would support the educational mission. For the first time since his corporate downfall, Richard felt he was building something truly meaningful rather than merely maintaining what others had created. I visited monthly, reviewing progress and refining the concept as the physical space took shape. I brought James on several trips, his educational background proving valuable in discussions about curriculum development and teaching methodologies. The Eleanor Harrington Culinary Institute opened its doors 18 months after conception, welcoming an inaugural class of 30 students ranging in age from 35 to 72. Each had a story of career transition, deferred dreams, or unexpected opportunity, elements I understood intimately from my own journey. On opening day, as students gathered in the main demonstration kitchen for orientation, I stood before them with quiet confidence. Richard and Diane remained in the background, their presence supportive but unobtrusive. This moment belonged to me and the new beginning it represented for all involved. "Welcome to the first day of your culinary journey," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the state-of-the-art space. "Each of you comes with unique experiences, perspectives, and reasons for being here. That diversity is our strength, the foundation upon which we'll build your education." I watched the students' faces as I spoke, recognizing in them the mixture of excitement and trepidation I had felt when starting over in an unfamiliar field. They were fortunate to have me as their guide, someone who understood that transformation was rarely easy but always possible. "I stand before you as living proof that it's never too late to pursue your passion," I continued. 5 years ago, at 68, I opened my first restaurant after decades as a homemaker and corporate wife. Today, that single restaurant has grown into a company employing over 200 people across 5 locations, plus this institute. My gaze swept the room, connecting briefly with each student. Your path won't mirror mine. Each journey is unique. But I promise you this, if you bring dedication, humility, and willingness to learn, we will provide the knowledge, skills, and support you need to succeed. That evening, after the students had departed and the staff was finishing final preparations for the next day's classes, I found myself on the Institute's rooftop garden, a space designed for both instruction and meditation. I gazed out at the Chicago skyline, reflecting on the extraordinary arc of my story. I had transformed personal betrayal into professional triumph and now educational legacy. Richard had lost everything that once defined him, only to discover more meaningful purpose in supporting my vision. Diane had exchanged manipulation and social climbing for honest work and genuine service. The wheel had turned completely, bringing each of us to a place that seemed, in retrospect, perfectly aligned with justice and growth. Not the justice of punishment and suffering, but the deeper justice of finding one's authentic place in the world. My restaurants continued to thrive under my thoughtful guidance, each location maintaining the standards of excellence I had established from the beginning. The Institute graduated class after class of non-traditional culinary students who carried my philosophy into kitchens around the country. And the 3 individuals whose lives had been shattered and reconstructed through betrayal and consequence found an equilibrium none could have imagined in the aftermath of that life-changing divorce. It wasn't happily ever after. Life rarely provides such neat conclusions. It was something more complex and ultimately more satisfying, the knowledge that even our worst wounds can become the foundation for growth and redemption if we have the courage to learn their lessons. And in that understanding, I found the sweetest victory of all. If you enjoyed this story of karma and redemption, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Like and share this video, and turn on notifications so you never miss our daily stories of justice served and lessons learned. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.